Hello guys, welcome to Codit. So today we'll be building a little JavaScript validation form, so you can take a look at the form that we're trying to implement the JavaScript validation. Alright, so we're supposed to, when a user clicks on the submit, the form is supposed to be validated. Normally you can't, as a developer, it's always advisable to validate your form, validate every input, check if a user actually imputed a data on this said input before submitting, and we are also supposed to activate the button to select a query type. Alright, so this is the file. Alright, so I've also included this same starter file as a link to my GitHub repository, so you can navigate to the link and download the starter file and work along with me. Alright, so this is the HTML file basically that we use for the interface, and this is the CSS. This is the CSS file also. Alright, so let's see how we can create this validation. First of all, we'll need to link up our JavaScript, and if you go to the design folder, the active state, that is the error states, that's what we are also trying to develop. Okay, so according to the error fields, you can see that there are some certain fields we need to validate, including the query type. So if a button is not selected, the error state should be please select a query type. Alright, so let's see how we can implement this using JavaScript. Alright, so on your index.html, link up your JavaScript file. Okay, so you call up your source. So this should be app.js. Okay, then you can open up that file so that we can work together. So following up with this tutorial, you should be conversant or know a little about JavaScript. Okay, the JavaScript DOM, how you can select elements using JavaScript. Okay, so the first thing we have to actually get is the onSubmit. Okay, so you can see that these inputs are all wrapped inside the form tag. So we can get the onSubmit function by giving this an ID. Alright, so let's give this form an ID. Alright, so let's give it an ID of, let's say, my form. Okay, so we have an ID of my form. Alright, so let's select this ID on JavaScript. So let's say document get element ID. So this is how we can select elements by its ID on the HTML. So we have what my form. Alright, so let's quickly add event listener. So this time it's going to be what? Submit. So we're going to implement the submit function as the event listener. So let's send an alert to check if this is working. So alright, so once a user clicks on this submit, alright, it's not, it says working. Alright, so our submit button has been triggered using the add event listener submit function. Okay, so this time around we will need to stop the reloading, so you can see that at every submit the form gets reloaded. Alright, so in order to stop that, we need to actually add an event to this function. Okay, then let's say we call up the event dot prevent default. So this event dot prevent default automatically stops the reload of the form. You can see. Alright, so let's refresh that. Okay, so this time around, let's just go live directly so that our form can automatically be updated, right, instead of using the copy part. So once you click on submit, you can see there's no reload happening on that page. So you can still send an alert to see if this has been triggered. Alright, so you can see it's been triggered. Alright, and the reload has stopped working. So we'll be passing a function to this. Alright, so let's just pass a function that we use to validate the form. Alright, so let's say validate form function. Okay, so let's call up this validate form function. So you can use the const arrow function, or you can use the normal function, whichever method you want to use. Okay, so let's say const validate form. Okay, alright, so let's also send an alert of working. Yeah, so our validate form function has been triggered. Alright, so let's start taking the inputs one after the other and see how we can validate all of these inputs. Alright, so starting from the first name, as you can see, you have a div container with a class of first name. Okay, so you have an input. So let's give this input an ID of first name. Okay, then we can also give the error state, where we can dynamically pass different error messages, alright, depending on the type of input you're working on. Alright, so let's just send as an error, let's say first -name. Alright, so let's start from there. So I'm just going to get rid of this alert, and let's say first name validation. So let's call up this ID as first name equal to document.querySelector. You can also use document.getElement by ID also to get elements by ID. You can also use query selector to get elements by ID. So if you're using query selector, you use hash, and the ID name is that you have stated. Alright, so you have first name as an ID, and you're also selecting it using the hash. Alright, so what about the error? So we have const first name error equal to document.querySelector, and since we're selecting a class using the query selector, you use dot. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here. Okay, so for classes you use dot, for IDs you use hash. Alright, so let's move on. So the first thing we actually need to check is if there's an input, there's the user actually filled an input, right? So if the user didn't, we can actually send out an error message. So let's do that. So using the if conditional statement, we can check the first name. But how do we access the value? We use the word first name dot value, alright, to check equal to empty. Yeah, so we're checking if the value inserted is an empty string. So we can set an alert first of all to say, let's say first name is required. Alright, so if the first name dot value is empty, we are sending an alert to check, alright, to notify the user that the first name is required. So click on the submit button. You can see it says what the first name is required because there is no input on the first name. So instead of using an alert, we'll be using the first name error variable. So we are going to be calling out first name error dot test content. So you can use test content to add a string of tests, alright, on your input or on your tag, or you can use the inner HTML or the inner test also. So using the test content, you can say what is the error state? Is it this field is required? Let's say. Okay, yeah, so this field is required. So this field is required. Okay, so let's try that out. So you can see it says what this field is required. So it ensures that a user actually enters a string of text before proceeding. Alright, and according to the error state, you can also see that the input has a red outline, alright, on the input. So going back to the CSS of this project, alright, we actually gave the input an invalid class. Alright, you can see it says what input.invalid, 1 pixel solid red. Alright, so we use the variable color. You can see this is the red. So we're supposed to call this up on JavaScript and dynamically add it when there is an error. And we gave the input an ID of first name. So we can as first say first name dot class lists dot add. Alright, so you can dynamically add classes using the class list. So this time we're using what the invalid class. Alright, so checking this out, alright, you can see that has been achieved. Okay, so we've been able to validate the first name field, and if you add an input, alright, submit, so we are supposed to also dynamically clear that error state if this user has inputted an input on that test. So let's see how we can clear those error states. So let's say clear error state. So we need to access all the inputs. So that will be const inputs equal to document.query selector all. So we need to access all the inputs. So selecting a tag, still using the query selector, you don't need to place an hash or a dot, alright, before it, just call up the tag name itself. So we are accessing the inputs, alright. So we have to look through each input and look for that input that has a class of invalid. So once we can detect that class of invalid, we remove it. So this is going to be input dot for each input, alright, So we can place this for each input. Okay, so we need to access the input dot class list dot remove is what invalid. So I'm going to target each input and remove that class list of invalid. Alright, so let's try that out again. So we have this. So once a user inputs a test, clicks on submit, you can see that red outline gets removed. Same applies to your test. So we also need to access all the error states, right? So calling up the error, so that should be const errors equal to documents dot query selector all. Okay, so that will be a class of error. Alright, so we need to also look through each errors. That's for each error. Alright, so we are trying to clear the test content this time around. So it's going to be error dot test content will be set to an empty string. Alright, to be set to an empty string. So let's take a look at that. I'm sorry. Yes. Alright. So now once you add a test and you click on what submit, that gets cleared out. So we've been able to validate the first name field. We also called up the clear error to clear any error once this user has entered an input on that field. We can also check, we can also check if this if a number starts the field, right, by simply using the if statement. Alright, and first name, let's check using the regress. Alright, so let's check. So if it starts with a number, the first name field starts with a number, so first name dot value. Alright, we can also send an error. Alright, so first name error dot test contents. Field first name should not start with a number. Alright, so using regress, it's also easy to check the character. Alright, so this is the starting point of the character. So it checks at the start to see if the first name actually starts with a number. So if it does, then we send out an error to the user notifying that it should not start with a number. Then we can also add the class list.add of what invalid. Okay, so we can have what 9 John. Okay, then click on submit. Alright, let's see that is not working. Alright, let's repeat that. Alright, so this is working. Okay, so what about 9? Okay, so let's see where the error is. Okay, we're supposed to use the test method. So we wrap this, right, cut and paste in between the test method. So we are testing, we're using the request to test for the character. So let's try that out again. 9 John. So first name should not start with a number. Alright, so that is how you can also restrict the user from using a number in an input, in a text input, okay, where they're supposed to enter a string of text. Okay, so since we've been able to validate the first name, let's also do that for the last name. Alright, so we are also giving an ID. I'm sorry, let me quickly close this so that it will not interrupt us. So we have what, the last name, and we also have what, the last name error, just like we did on the first name. Alright, so now, but before we continue that, we are going to have a class called, so let's say let is valid, alright, equal to false. Okay, so we are going to use this is valid variable to submit our results, okay, and then send out any message status after the form has been validated. So we are going to set is valid is equal to true, and is valid is equal to true. Okay, so that applies for the last name also. So we have to access the ID for the last name and the class for the last name error. Alright, so let's do that real quick. So this is going to be what? Last name validation. So that should be const last name equal to document.query selector, selecting an ID of last name. And we also need the error field. So last name error should be document.query selector. That is a class. So last name hyphen error. Let's check if yes, last name hyphen error. Okay, so let's quickly validate this. It's the same with the first name validation. So we have to validate. So let's say if last name dot value, and that is how we use to access the value on the input. Okay, so if that is empty, you can call up the last name error. Yeah, that should be last name error dot text content. It says what this field is required. Then we are also setting what the last name dot class lists dot add of what invalid. Right? It's just the same thing as the first name validation. And we are also setting is valid is true. Okay, so we have these two. So so you can see that the error gets displayed on the boxes. Okay, then we are also checking if last name of your tests using the reverse. Okay, dot tests last name dot value, right? So if there's a number as part of the value, okay, we are also sending last name dot text content. Okay, so let's say last name should not start with a number. Alright, so that's why we are using different error error classes to display dynamic messages based on the input. Okay, so we are also calling up the last name dot class lists dot add, which is what invalid, and the setting is valid equal to true. Okay, so we've been able to validate the first name and also the last name. So once you enter your string of text, click on submit, the error state gets cleared out. Alright, so let's move on to the email validation. Alright, so for the email validation, we'll be using regress. So I've quickly copied up the regress validation that we'll be using. Okay, so this is a little bit long, so I just copied it from a previous project. Okay, so you can type it out so that you can see how it works. Okay, every dot and every character are important, right, when validating emails using the request. So that's why I just quickly copied it up. Okay, I will also include this on the starter file so that you can have it, okay, when you're working along with us on this project. So let's see how we can validate a user's email address. Alright, so let's go to the email. So we have the email, so let's give this an ID. We're using ID of email. Then for the error, we're giving it a class of what? A email error. Alright, so let's call this to work. So this is going to be email validation. Okay, so we're going to call up the email documents query selector. So that would be what? An ID of email, and also the email error. So that would be const email hyphen or underscore error. JavaScript doesn't use an hyphens for variable declarations. So call up what? Document dot query selector for the class. That will be dot email hyphen error. Okay, so let's first of all start by checking if this email is empty. Right, so if the email is empty, we can send out an error message. Okay, so if email.value is empty, so if it's empty, we need to call up what? The email error dot test contents and say what? This field is required, and we'll also be calling up the email ID to add our class lists dot add of what? Invalid, and we're also setting is valid is true. Okay, so if our email is empty, we're also sending an error to the user notifying that that field is required. Okay, so once they have filled up this, so we can say this and all that, and we also need to validate the email to ensure that this user is actually entering the right email address. So let's just say const email request. Okay, so I'll copy all of this. and paste. Alright, so just copy and paste becomes way more easier. So we need to check if it's not right. We need not email dot tests. Alright, email dot value, okay, dot trim. So we can sometimes trim the email to get rid of any white line spaces at the front and the back. So we can also trim this. Alright, we can use the trim method to trim our email addresses, okay, to ensure that we get the exact string, alright, that the user imputed. So if it's not that, so we need to send an error, email error dot test content that says what, please enter a valid email address. Yes, so also calling up the email dot class list dot add of what, invalid, and you're also setting is valid is equal to true. Okay, so let's change this email type of email to test so that we can be able to use JavaScript to validate it, because email type of input type of email uses the HTML5 validation to check, right? So this time around we're using JavaScript, so you can as well use input type of test for our email address. So let's try that again. Please enter a valid email address. So you can see that that is working quite well. So this is just EJ Graphics. So you click on submit. Please enter a valid email address. It ensures that the user actually uses an @ and a dot, alright, as a character on that email address. So we've validated the first name, last name, and the email. So let's see how we can select a query type. Okay, so this time around we'll be using the click function. So click on either this button or this button. Okay, and if you take a look at the the query, right, you can see that it has a button and it also has an image in that button. So let's first of all start by giving an ID to this. So this is the first one. Alright, this is general inquiry, so let's just say general, and this has an ID of support. Alright, so let's give that an ID of support. So we have ID of general, ID of support. So let's call up each individual button. Let's start by actually calling up the first one. So if we are able to achieve the first one, then we can replicate it for the support. So this should be outside the form validation. Alright, it should be outside the form validation. So we need to call up the general button. So general btn equal to document dot query selector is an ID of general. Okay, so now we need to initiate a click event to trigger the button. So we have to call up btn.onClick. Okay, you can add an arrow function to that. So btn.onClick, we say what, alert button triggered. So let's see if that works. So once you click on this, you can see it says what, button triggered. Alright, so we've been able to select the first button by using the onClick function. So apart from that, once we click on the button, we need to apply some special styles to it. So if you go to the button CSS style, as you can see, it has an active class. It has an active class we need to add. So once the user clicks on the button, we automatically add this active CSS class, and the button also has an image. Okay, the button has an image, so let's select the image also, which is set to display none. So we need to call up the button. So let's say general image. Okay, document dot query selector. Okay, so using the button as an ID, targeting the span, also targeting the image. Alright, so now let's apply all of this together. So this is going to be what general button dot class list dot add of active. So we're adding the active class. So once the button is clicked, that means the button should be active, right? Then we're also calling up the general image. Okay, dot style dot display equal to what block. So apart from using class list dot add to add a class, we can also add an inline CSS style using the style attribute. So this method is a JavaScript method used to add an inline CSS style. Alright, so let's try this. So once you click on this, you can see that button is selected. Alright, so let's do that for this support request. And before we also continue, we need to validate this button. So let's add a global variable. So let's say const is clicked, or is button clicked, clicked, let's say false. Is button clicked, let's make it false. Then if button is clicked, is button clicked is true. Alright, instead of using const, let's use let. Okay, I won't encounter any issue. So let is button clicked equal to false. So if the button is clicked, we make it what? True. Alright, so that's should also be applied on the support button. So we have the ID of support, so let's call that up. Support button. So let's say document query selector ID of support. And we also need to get that support image. So const support image, okay, which is document dot query selector. So we're selecting the button and targeting the image or the span, right? And we target what? The image. Okay, so which is same as the general image. So we'll need to apply the onClick functionality also. So that would be support button onClick. Alright. So call up the arrow function, then call up the support button class list dot add. Alright, so that should be what? Active. And we're also calling up the support image dot style dot display equal to what? Block. And we are also setting is button clicked towards true. Alright, so let's see how this what this does on our page. So if you click on this, it's selected. If you also click on this, alright, so you can see our image is not properly selected. So let's see style.display.block. So let's see what we're doing wrong. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So support span image. Yes, so the source is correct. So support image, query selector, then we have the button span image. So let me do this again. Style.display equal to block. Alright, so let's try that out. Alright, the image is still not selected. Okay. Okay, so let's just target the image directly. Okay, so let's just say support button. Alright, so instead of wasting all our time trying to find the particular error, just call up the button itself. Dot support button, support btn. Yeah, support btn. Yeah, double B. That would have caused another issue. Okay, so that is correct. So support button, the style.display should be blocked. So once you click on this, yeah, so it's perfectly working now. And if you also click on this, you can see you're selecting the two buttons at the same time. So let's just amend this code. So let's take this. All right, let's take this below this. So if the general button is clicked, we can remove the active state from the support button, and we can set the display of that to none, of that button to none. Yeah, so same applies to this. So I can copy this and paste below. So if the support button is clicked, I can remove the general button active state, and I can also remove its image. Alright, none. Okay, so once this is selected, it enables you to toggle on each button. Okay, so that's an easy manipulation. Alright, so let's move on to validating this this form just in case none of the button gets clicked, right? We need to validate. So since we have this button clicked, we can move over to the validation, right? We also need to select the error. So let's say query error. Alright, query error. So let's copy this for our validation. So that will be query error document dot query selector. That will be query error. So if this is not active, alright, so if it's not active, let's call up the query error. So this is our validation. So let's say query selection validation Okay, so we need to say if not is button clicked. Alright, we need to call up what the query error dot test content, and we need to say please select a query type. Yeah. Then we are also setting is valid to what? To true. Okay, so let's try that out. So once a query type is not selected, it will notify the user to please select a query type. And did we also add any error states to this button? No, we did not. So yeah, so I guess it's okay. So let's just work on the message and the consent. Okay, so we have this, then this, and we are good to go on that validation. So let's work on the test area and also the consent, and we can apply the success state of this button. Okay, so for the test area, alright, so let's say test area validation. Okay, so for the test area we'll be needing an ID. Alright, so let's say message and the error, let's say message error, or just message error. Alright, to dynamically send out messages or error messages. Okay, so we need to call up a message query selector. So since it's an ID, that will be what message, and we also need the error. Document dot query selector, so that's a class message hyphen error. Alright, so do ensure that your classes and your ID are the same. So you can say I use message underscore error as the class, and I'm using message hyphen error, so that would have given me some issues. So we need to also validate this. Alright, so if it's empty, we need to send out an error state. I call up the message error, the test content that says what this field is required. Okay, so this field is required, and we also need to, if you also take a look at the test area, we have the class of invalid attached to the test area. So we need to call up the message, which is the ID dot class list dot add invalid, and we're also setting is valid is true. Okay, so that is for the test message. So you can see that all your inputs has been validated. So once you are able to enter, alright, this is a message. So once you click on submit, you can see that the test error gets removed, but the tests, the border on the test area tag doesn't get removed because we have not actually called it up. Okay, so let's call up the message. Okay, so let's clear the error for the message. So we can also say message, okay, dot class lists dot remove invalid. Okay, so let's see if that works. Alright, so let's come down here. So once there's, yeah, so we have an issue based on that class. So let's just get, alright, so const test area equal to document query selector, or the test area. So you're trying to get the test area input. It's only one, so you don't need to use your query selector or. Alright, so what do we need to do? So we need to clear the error. Alright, so that will be test area dot class lists dot remove invalid. Okay, so let's try that this time around. That should definitely work. Okay, so this is a message. So once you click on, so you can see that input, that error state gets cleared. Alright, so that's how you can validate your forms, your inputs, your email, your test areas. So let's work on this consent. So we're supposed to click on the consent, then the button, this box is supposed to be checked, and similar to our button, right? If you go over to the consent, okay, so you can see that it has an image which we have definitely set to display none on the CSS style. Alright, so if you take a look at it, you can see consent from the div image has the display of none. Okay, so first of all, let's call up this old consent form and add the events, the click function to it directly. So let's say document, right, dot query selector. So that would be consent form dot add event listener. So click, then call up an arrow function. So you can use this method. You can also use this method of applying your click event. Okay, so this is using the add event listener directly on the class. Alright, so let's just say alert. Let's say button clicked. Yeah, so let's try that out. So once you click on this button, it says button clicked. Okay, so since that button has been clicked, we need to add up that image. So we need to call up the consent form div image. So let's say const image, consent image equal to what? Document.query selector. So that will be consent form div, then target the image. Okay, so now once this button has been clicked, what I just need to do is to call up the consent image dot style dot display equal to block. Okay, so making it easy for us to check our button. Alright, so now you can also validate it just in case this button hasn't been clicked. So let's say let is consent equal to false or null. Alright, let's also use null. Okay, that means there's no value or so attached. So let's say is consent equal to what? True. Okay, is consent is equal to true. So you can select this. So this consent has been set to true. So to validate the consent, alright, so let's say consent validation. So if we shouldn't have made this a global variable, so okay, except we okay, I think we are on the same page. We need to add an error state. Yes, so let's say consent error. So copy this and move over so it can be attached to this. Okay, so consent error equal to document query selector. So that is a class of consent error. So if it's not is consent, right? We need to call up consent error dot test content equal to, I think there's a certain particular error message. Alright, to submit this form, please consent to be contacted. That is it. So just copy that and paste on your code. Okay, so we are also setting is valid. Is equal to true. Okay, so I think with that we've been able to do justice to this form validation. So once you click, you can see that all our input is validated. Alright, so the errors are visible, letting the user know that you have to actually fill up this, okay, before submitting the form. So let's just do that. So this, select the support request, and let's say this is a message. Okay, then you can see, so once this is clicked, right, that means your form is ready to be submitted. Alright, so now that brings us to this is valid class that we've been using. So let's say if not is valid, alright, you can send an alert that says form submitted successfully. Alright, form submitted successfully. So let's try that again. Let's just fill up this, right? Because we already know. Okay. To click and submit, right? To submit. So once you click, it says what? Form submitted successfully. Alright. So now, while that is all good, we have a success state that we have already developed ourselves. So let's call up this success state. So this is going to be the success message we display. So let's say const success equal to document dot query selector. That will be success state. Alright, so what else are we trying to do? Okay, so once it's valid, we need to set our success state. So let's take a look at the success state, what we apply to this. Alright, so we said translate y minus, so we have to call up the transform, and translate y needs to be 0. Okay, so let's try that out. Okay, so we have to call up the success dot style, okay, dot transform equal to translate y, right, should be 0. So this is how you can also add some dynamic animations, okay, to your JavaScript and also to your CSS. So since the transform is calling up the translate y to be -150, so this is going to be style.transform, and translate y should be 0. Okay, so let's check all of this out. Okay, so let's say this is a message, then call this up. So once you click on, okay, so let's click on submit, so you can see the success message gets displayed. And we can also clear up our input at the same time by calling up alright, where's our input? So that should be first name, okay, first name dot value is equal to empty, okay, then last name dot value equal to empty as well. Alright, then email dot value is also empty. Test area dot value, no, not test area, message dot value is also what? Empty. Okay, so these are the basic input: first name, last name, email, and test area. Alright, so let's try that again. Select a query type to say this is a message, add your consent, so you click on what? Submit. So you can see that this input field has been cleared. Alright, so I do hope that you were able to follow along with this exercise. Okay, so if you haven't, I will also send the final project so that you can also go through it. Alright, so please follow my channel for more JavaScript coding tips and solutions, and subscribe, turn on the notification so that you can get updates on any latest videos I drop as well. Okay, so do have a wonderful time. Thank you for watching.